So thank you for coming for this last lecture on finite volume schemes and long time behavior. So first, I will start with the discrete functional inequalities. As I showed you that in order to study the long time behavior of some equations, we need an entropy dissipation property, and we need, in general, some functional inequality. And I explained you during the first lecture that we have to adapt the functional inequality to the discrete setting of the finite volume method. So I will start with discrete functional inequalities. Then I will show you some results for the porous media equations, and finally some results for the Fokker-Planck equations. Okay, so we start with the discrete functional inequalities, and I give you here a list of references where you can find some discrete functional inequalities for finite volume reconstruction. And you see that there are lots of papers, but in practice, what happened is that when people were working on some analysis of finite volume schemes for a given problem, and they needed a specific functional inequalities, in general, the proof of the discrete functional inequality was given in appendix, so that you have lots of papers of where you can find this kind of inequalities. Okay, with Marianne Besmoulin-Chattard and Francis Filbé, we tried to write a survey paper with some specific proofs where you can find Poincaré-Sobolev inequalities, Gagliardo-Nirenberg-Sobolev inequalities for classical 2 points finite volume schemes, so the reconstruction I will study now, but also for other kinds of reconstruction, so for DDFV schemes. Okay, so once again, I recall what is the space of approximate solutions and what are the norms for this space. So what will be denoted by x of t, it is the set of piecewise constant reconstruction on the given mesh T. So the function ut is just equal to uk on the cell k, and you have this piecewise constant reconstruction. So this set is included in the set of L1 functions. But as I already explained, it is not included in H1. Okay, so just I recall here the LQ norms, but it's possible to compute the classical LQ norm of this kind of function. So for the LQ norm denoted here with the 2 bars and 0q, it is just the sum, using the definition of the function, it is the sum over the control volumes of the measure of k, uk to the power q, and you take the power 1 over q. It is the exact LQ norm computed for this function. You also can have the L infinity norm here. But what is different? It will be for the W1Q norms or H1 norms, and I will introduce some specific discrete W1Q norm. But before, I give you some assumption on the mesh we need for the discrete functional inequality. So we will assume that each control volume k is star-shaped with respect to the inner point xk. If you remember, we have a set of control volumes, a set of edges, and we have a set of points. So 1 point xk for each control volume k, and we need that the control volume is star-shaped with respect to xk. Now we have a second assumption, which can be seen as a regularity assumption on the mesh. So when you have a given age, sigma, you have two neighbors, k and l, so 2 points, xk and xl. So we have defined d sigma as the distance between xk and xl. And now for the functional inequality, I will no more assume that the mesh is admissible as the sense that I gave you. So this line is not necessarily perpendicular to the edge, but so we can compare this quantity to the distance from xk to the h sigma, and we will assume that this distance divided by d sigma is always bounded by below by a given xi, which is positive. Okay, so we have a relation between the distance from xk to sigma and the distance d sigma. So we will use this assumption.
What does it mean? What does the remark mean?
What you mean?
No, on the bottom.
Okay, because when you write a finite volume scheme for an elliptic equation, a diffusion equation, you have an admissibility assumption, which means that the line between xk and xl must be orthogonal to the h sigma. So that yes, it's in order to have the consistency of the flux, because you use an approximation of a normal gradient in practice. Okay, so in the first talk I explained that we needed this assumption for the analysis of the scheme for the Poisson equation, for example, and but in practice for the discrete functional inequality, okay, we do not deal with the scheme for a given equation. We just are studying some functional inequalities. Okay, so here now I give the definition of the discrete W1P semi-norm, and maybe I can explain why it is a kind of this W1P semi-norm. So you see that we have defined UL minus UK divided by D sigma. This quantity can be seen as an approximation of the normal gradient through the AG, through the H sigma. So here we have an approximation, a kind of approximation of the gradient, and measure of sigma d sigma. It is a volume associated to the H sigma, so that here what you see is a kind of integral of the gradient of u to the power p. Okay, it's a discrete counterpart of this quantity. So we define this discrete W1P semi-norm, and then we can define the full norm just adding the LP norm. So here you have the definition of the discrete W1P norm. And you see that in this case, as it is not the exact W1P norm, I add here T because it is associated to the mesh. Okay, so when you have the notation with 1P T with 1 bar or with 2 bars, it means that it is a discrete norm. Okay? So if we may have some homogeneous Dirichlet boundary conditions on a part of the boundary, so for a given scheme, so where you have fixed, so on a part of the boundary denoted gamma 0, you will have 0 boundary conditions, then we would like to go up to the boundary. So you see here, in this definition, I have just the sum over the internal edges. But now, in order to take into account somewhere that we have some homogeneous Dirichlet boundary condition, I want to go up to the boundary. So here you have a sum over all the edges. And if you have an edge included in the gamma 0 part of the boundary, then for this you want to replace this quantity by 0 minus uk. So you define this quantity d sigma u. It's just absolute value of uk. For an internal edge, it's absolute value of uk minus ul, and you don't want to take into account the other part of the boundary, so you put 0. So you see that this is not exactly the same definition, because now you will go up to the boundary. Okay, and it means if you want, when you want to generalize the classical Poincaré inequality defined on H1 naught, you will use this definition for the approximation of the L2 norm of the gradient. Okay, just some basic relations. So the first relations are just consequences of Hölder inequality. So if you take a given S and P greater than 1 and with S less than P, then you have a relation between the LS norm of UT and the LP norm of UT, and just the constant given by Hölder inequality written with P prime, which is P over S, and Q prime, it's P divided by P minus S. Here you have the measure of omega times P minus S divided by PS. So for this is classical Hölder inequality. Now you can do exactly the same thing for the W1P and 1S norm. So you apply just an Hölder inequality on this sum. Okay, so that's with the same exponents. And if you apply the Hölder inequality, you will find the W1P norm, but you will get this quantity when you apply it, so coming from this term, you will have this quantity to the power P minus S divided by P first. And for this quantity, the sum for a given age of the measure of sigma d sigma, using the regularity assumption, you can rewrite that d sigma is bounded by 1 over xi, the distance of xk to sigma, and now this product is the measure of a triangle up to the constant d. It is the measure of a triangle inside k, so that when you sum these quantities, you get the measure of omega. You have the dimension of the space and divided by xi. That's why you get this quantity, and you see here that you can already imagine that all the Poincaré-Sobolev inequality will depend on the regularity of the mesh xi. Okay. So these relations are classical relations, and now here I just detail the value of the constant. Is it okay? Do you have questions? No? Okay, I just want to give the ideas in order to get the discrete functional inequalities, and I think that the main idea I will show you now is that the discrete space of function xt, it is not included in H1, but it is included in a space which is L1 cap BV, And just I want to define this space, so I introduce what is the total variation of an L1 function here. So you assume that omega is an open set of Rn. So you see sometimes the dimension is D, sometimes it's capital N. Okay, and U is an L1 function. Then we can define the total variation of the function U as this quantity. So it means you take a test function phi with this regularity. You want that the n infinity bound is bounded by 1, and you compute the integral over omega of u times the divergence of phi. And you take the supremum over all these test functions phi, and it defines the total variation of u. With this quantity, you can define the space L1 cap BV. It is a set of L1 functions which have a bounded total variation. And this space can be endowed with the norm, the BV norm. It is the sum of the L1 norm and of the total variation of U. Okay, and it appears that this space is really adapted to our set of discrete functions because you see that we have just piecewise constant function, and we have on each control volume you have different values, and you will just, when you apply this definition, it's easy to compute what is the total variation of such a function. And in practice, the total variation, it's just, for such a function, it's just a sum over the edges of the measure of sigma times the difference, so absolute value of the difference of uk minus ul. So it's exactly what we define, what is the discrete W11 norm. Okay, so the set of discrete function x of t is in practice included in L1 cap BV, because for such a function ut, the BV norm, finally, the definition of the BV norm for such a function, it is just the sum of the L1 norm and of, so this quantity is equal to the discrete W11 semi-norm, so that the BV norm is exactly the discrete W11 norm. Okay, and it is bounded. So the set of discrete function is included in L1 cap BV. And now, in order to prove the discrete functional inequalities, I will give you the starting point is just given by this theorem, which says that the set L1 cap BV is included is continuously embedded in Ln over n minus 1 of omega. So it means it's written here. So there exists a constant c depending only on omega, such that the Ln divided by n minus 1 norm of u is bounded by a constant times the BV norm. Okay, so we can use this inequality for a discrete function ut, and after that, so it is a good starting point for the discrete Poincaré-Sobolev inequality. So I give you here the result. So if you are familiar with Poincaré-Sobolev inequality, you may think, okay, nothing new. If you just have, you see here the result, the classical result for a classical W1P function, so here if you have the exact W1P norm and not UT but a function in W1P, you just recover the classical embedding in LQ for Q, so satisfying this relation, if P is strictly less than N, Q is between 1 and P star, and if P is greater than N, then you can take Q from 1 to infinity, but except infinity, and you have this relation between the LQ norm and the W1P norm. So now, this theorem, it's just an adaptation to our discrete setting of the classical Poincaré-Sobolev inequality, because we now assume that we have a given mesh with a given regularity, and for a given function in our space of discrete function, we have the same kind of inequality, and now you see here that the constant in the inequality depends on the regularity of the mesh. Okay, so we rewrite exactly how it depends on the regularity, but and the constant C depends only on P, Q, N, and the domain omega. Okay, I have written 3 slides with the proof of the theorem, but I think it's really too technical. So if you are interested by this kind of proof, you can read them after the school and maybe later, and you can have a look also on the different papers. So I will not show the slide. I will go very quickly, but you can find the definition. So you see with 3 slides, you have the ideas of the proof. Now I just give the specific result for the case where we have homogeneous Dirichlet boundary condition on a part of the boundary, and what we attend is that we have the same kind of inequality, but now here I just want to have the W1P0 norm, so the semi-norm, here defined just with 1 bar. Okay? I think, I know that it's maybe hard early in the morning and it's rather technical, but okay, I have to fix this relation because I will use them in the study of the long-time behaviors. Okay, so the first result is for the general case where you have no boundary conditions. This result is for the case where you have some homogeneous Dirichlet boundary condition on a part of the boundary, and the last one is is the extension of the Poincaré-Wirtinger inequality. So in this case, you want just to compare U to its mean value, and you take the LP norm, and in this case, you also recover the W1P semi-norm at the right-hand side. Okay? So if you don't know these kind of inequalities, maybe you are not interested in, and if you already know them, you just see that they are a discrete adaptation of the classical one to the discrete settings. Okay? So now I want to focus on the long-time behavior of the porous media equations and on the finite volume schemes for the porous media equations. So I start with the presentation of the scheme. Maybe I will write some things on the blackboard. Just to recall what we did in the first lectures. So you see that in this case, the flux is minus the gradient of f to the power beta. Okay, and so that for the, you know, what I did before when I write an equation under the form dtf plus divergence of j is equal to 0, in practice, the finite volume scheme will be written. So we take, I will choose always some implicit Euler scheme in time, and then after integration over the control volume, the general form of the scheme is always this one. And I just have to define the numerical schemes. So here, fk sigma must be an approximation of minus the integral of the gradient of f to the power beta dot the normal. So with the notation, if you remember. So here, I assume that the mesh satisfies the admissibility condition. So we have xk, xl, and we have the normal nk sigma to the h sigma. Okay, I already gave the definition for the case where beta is equal to 1, and now I will just do exactly the same thing. I will define fk sigma as, so for this term, the approximation of the gradient of f to the power beta dot the normal, I will take f, so with the minus, so I keep the minus, fl to the power beta minus fk to the power beta divided by d sigma, and as we have the integral over sigma, we have here the measure of sigma. Okay, this is for an internal edge. Okay, if you have a boundary edge, so I mean here you have no, maybe here you just, here you have this edge is included in gamma d, then you just take the value at the boundary, so you have to define some approximation of f at the boundary given by the boundary data minus fk to the power beta divided by the distance between from xk to sigma. So if it is for sigma included in gamma d, and if you have no flux boundary condition, you want that the numerical flux vanishes, so 0. Okay, so I hope it's okay for you. I already explained that for beta is equal to 1, so I introduced the notation, so tau sigma will be m, the measure of the edge divided by the distance d sigma, and in this, for this case, d sigma will be the distance from xk to sigma. So we have this notation, and you see here I have not written the time, but in practice if you put n plus 1 here, you will put n plus 1 everywhere there, so that you exactly recover. So I use now this notation, so dk sigma of a given u, so applied here to f to the power beta, it's just a difference ul minus uk or u at the Dirichlet boundary minus uk or 0. And with this compact notation, I can write a compact definition for each edge depending on if it is an interior edge, Dirichlet boundary edge, or Neumann edge. Okay, so you have here the scheme for the porous media equation with Dirichlet boundary condition on a part of the boundary and no flux boundary condition on the other part. So you see that this scheme leads to a nonlinear system of equations. Okay, the first thing we have to do is to prove that we have existence of a solution to this scheme. So the nonlinearity here is easy to deal with, so it's quite old result due to Aymar, Galouette, Hilhorst, and Knight-Sliman. So I will assume the following hypothesis. So I assume that the mesh is admissible and we have also some regularity of the mesh, so the given Xi. I will assume that we have somewhere some Dirichlet boundary condition. In practice, for this proposition, I think it's not crucial. I could have only Neumann boundary conditions, but for the steady state, I will need to have somewhere some Dirichlet boundary condition for the uniqueness. Okay, we start with non-negative initial values, and we will assume that we have some bounds on the Dirichlet boundary condition, and the lower bound is positive. Okay, it's also for the steady state. We need that. So in practice, the scheme I wrote has a unique non-negative solution. So in general, for these schemes or this set of nonlinear equations, to prove this kind of result, we just apply the fixed point theorem. So you can choose the one you want to use. So either for this case, you can write a kind of Picard iteration, but you can also use the Loret-Schauder theorem, and you will prove the existence of a non-negative solution. So if you use your Loret-Schauder, you will just have existence. If you have Picard, you may have existence and uniqueness directly, but you can also prove after that you have uniqueness of a solution, just comparing two solutions in this case. Okay. Now for the steady state. So if you remember, so the steady state is just obtained by removing the time evolution term. So you have Laplacian of f to the power beta is equal to 0. So the given schema is, so it is the same as here, but just you forget the evolution term. And you may think, oh, it's a nonlinear scheme, but you see that you can change the variable and define u is f infinity to the power beta, and finally you have a classical scheme for Laplace equation. So it's easy to prove that the scheme has a unique non-negative solution and that the scheme satisfies the bound prescribed by the boundary condition. So the solution of the scheme for the steady state is bounded from below by MD and from above by capital MD. Okay? And for the, maybe some word about the implementation of this scheme. So for the steady state, we really change the variables, use the classical scheme, so which is a linear scheme, and compute at the end f infinity. And for this one, for the linear system of equation, okay, you have to choose how you want to solve the nonlinear system of equations. And in general, Newton method is well adapted to the solution, to the resolution. Okay, so now I want to prove that the solution to the evolutive scheme converges in long time towards the solution of the scheme for the steady state. And I just give you this reminder. So this slide is a slide from the last lecture. So at the continuous level, I defined this entropy and proved that the dissipation of entropy is this quantity. Okay, and I showed you that we have some relation between entropy and dissipation, where we used Poincaré inequality. You see this quantity Cp, I recall you that it is the constant in the Poincaré inequality, and you have some value due to the boundary conditions. So you have a relation between the dissipation and the entropy, and then you get the exponential decay. Okay, so that was the result at the continuous level, and you see that it's really easy to adapt, to define this quantity for a discrete solution. Okay, it's written on the next slide, but just coming from there, you see that if f is just a given piecewise constant function, it's easy to define the entropy at the discrete entropy at set n. You will just take the sum over the control volume, and you just write the definition, but for ft, f and f infinity t. So you have the measure of k, fkn plus 1, fkn, sorry, to the power beta minus f infinity to the power beta, fk divided by beta plus 1 minus fkn to the power beta minus f infinity n to the power beta. No, fkn times fk infinity to the power beta. Okay, it's just adaptation to a discrete, a piecewise constant function. And for the dissipation, it's the same kind of adaptation than when we define the. So it is a W12 semi-norm of f beta minus f infinity to the power beta. So the definition I used is the sum over the edges of a measure of sigma d sigma and the quantity. So the discrete gradient is d sigma of f to the power beta minus f infinity to the power beta time n, fn to the square. Okay, I write d sigma because it can be the absolute value. I don't need, so as it is to the square. Okay, so you have, sorry, maybe I forgot here divided by d sigma, so that now you see that here I do not have exactly the same form. It's because tau sigma, it is a measure of sigma divided by d sigma. And so dk sigma or d sigma, it is the same quantity here. So you have the discrete relative entropy. Now you have the discrete dissipation. And at the continuous level, you have that dE over dt plus d is equal to 0. At the discrete level, you will not get equal to 0, but you want that it is negative so that the discrete relative entropy will be decaying. And just how do we prove this relation? It is very easy. It is just due to a convexity inequality and the use of the scheme due to if you write what is En plus 1 minus En, I just use the definition, and you have the sum of measure of k, and you have fkn plus 1 to the power beta minus fkn to the power beta divided by beta plus 1 minus fk infinity to the power beta times fkn plus 1 minus fkn. And now,
it's beta plus 1 for
okay. Thank you. I will see it now because I will just use a now it's the time where I can see that I made a mistake because I will use a convexity property for the function x to the power beta, so that this is bounded by, so here we have so fk, it's bounded by fkn plus 1 minus fkn times fkn plus 1 to the power beta, because the derivative of x to the power beta plus 1 is beta plus 1 x to the power beta, and the function is a convex function. So it's just a convexity inequality. And then you have fkn plus 1 to the power beta minus fk infinity to the power beta. So you have this relation, and now you can use, maybe I divide by delta t. So you see that this quantity is given by the scheme. By the scheme, you know that it is the sum over the edges of, so if I don't want to make a sign mistake, yes, it is with a plus, tau sigma, dk sigma of fn plus 1 to the power beta. But here I can subtract f infinity to the power beta, because f infinity is a solution to this scheme. So I can subtract this quantity. Okay, so I used the scheme at this point, and now what maybe I did quite fast in the first lecture is that when you have a sum over the control volume and then a sum over the edges, you can rewrite this double sum as the sum over all the edges of the mesh. And now you see, for an edge between K and a cell K and the cell L, you will see it when you have K here, and sigma is the edge between K and L, but you can see it when you have L here, and sigma is also the edge. And then it will change here the sign, because the quantity dL sigma is minus dk sigma. So that when you rewrite, so what I am doing here, it's a discrete integration by parts. Okay, I am writing the sum over control volume sum over the edges as a sum over all the edges of the mesh. And now I have tau sigma, dk sigma, fn plus 1 to the power beta minus f infinity to the power beta. And this quantity, it will be the value at k minus the value at L. So it is exactly the same value. So you exactly recover this term. Okay, it is just a discrete integration by part. And that's why, so you see that this term is exactly the dissipation term. The discrete dissipation term. Okay, it's like at the continuous level, I just derived the energy and I used the equation. And for the equation, in the equation you have the divergence time a function, and I made an integration by part just for this term. So that's exactly what I am doing at the discrete level. Okay, so you really find this relation between entropy and dissipation. So the discrete derivative, En plus 1 minus En divided by delta t plus the dissipation is bounded. So it implies, for instance, that if you want, you can take a given n compared to the initial value, so write a sum for some n, and you will find that at each step the entropy is bounded, and also the sum of the dissipation is bounded. And the sum of the dissipation, so it gives you some estimates on the approximate solution. But I will not focus today on that. I just want now to show that from this discrete entropy dissipation property, we can get the long time behavior of the entropy. So just as now at the continuous level, we need a Poincaré inequality, so with a discrete Poincaré inequality. So here you have a kind of L2 norm of the gradient of f to the power beta minus f infinity to the power beta. And here you have the L2 norm of f to the power beta minus f infinity to the power beta. So what is written here, it is just the discrete Poincaré inequality for the case where we have some homogeneous Dirichlet boundary condition, because you see that at a part of the boundary, f and f infinity have the same value, so they vanish at the boundary. So you have this, it is just a discrete Poincaré inequality applied to this function, f to the power beta minus f infinity to the power beta. Now, as at the continuous level, I need this elementary inequality in order to link the entropy. So here you see almost the function we had in the entropy to the L2 norm of this difference. So that finally we have this relation between the entropy and the dissipation. And here you have the md to the power beta minus 1. Why? Because of this term. This term is evaluated in f infinity, and we have proved some bounds at f infinity so that we can get this coefficient here in the inequality. So you have this relation between the entropy, discrete entropy and discrete dissipation. So that now you just have, if you replace in this inequality, you get a kind of geometric sequence on En, and you can get this relation between En plus 1 and En with this coefficient. And you see this coefficient, 1 plus delta t times the constant to the power minus 1, in practice it gives you the exponential decay of the discrete entropy. Okay, so here you have the result. So the exponential decay, the lambda constant is given here. So you have from E0 you have En with so bounded with this exponential value, so exponential minus lambda times Tn, and thanks to another elementary inequality, you can get also a decay on the L beta plus 1 norm. Okay? So in general, we always try to have a decay in some LP norm at the end, and here it's possible. Okay, so you may find the details of the proof in the paper with Maxime Herda, which will be published soon. Okay, do you have some questions on this part?
I have a very stupid question. Why is it called an entropy if it decreases with time?
Ah, it's the entropy of mathematicians. It's minus the entropy of physicians. So we work with decreasing entropies. It was not a stupid question. Other questions? Okay. So now I show you, so maybe the numerical results, an example. So we did some numerical experiments here with beta is equal to 4. We start with vanishing initial condition, and we just put some Dirichlet boundary condition here on a part of this side, and you see the evolution of the solution with respect to time, and you see that already at this time, 0.07, you already have the same profile than at for the steady state. And what you can see on this figure, we just plot the relative entropy and also the L beta plus 1 norm maybe to the power beta plus 1, so that we have the same constant. And you see the exponential decay towards the steady state, so here towards 0. So the zero of the computer, and you see that already at time 0.5 you have reached the steady state. Okay? So when beta increases, it's not always very easy to compute the solution to the scheme, so that to have the convergence of the Newton method, so that we use an adaptive time step strategy. So if the Newton method does not converge, we take a smaller time step up that we get some convergence. But in practice, we obtain some results also with greater values than 4. Okay, so now I come to the Fokker-Planck equations. And I recall you this slide. So we are considering a diffusion convection equation with a given velocity field u with some Dirichlet and Neumann boundary conditions. So you have already seen this slide, so I just recall that the steady state is given here, just for getting the evolutive term. So and you have this. So the specificity now is that this flux, J infinity, is divergence free due to the definition of the steady state. And then I showed you that rewriting F as F infinity times H, we can rewrite the flux, J. Now we have this convective part and this diffusive part. And what is crucial is that this convective part is with a divergence-free velocity field. Okay. And then I showed you exponential decay towards the steady state using this entropy function. So with the phi2, x minus 1 to the square, we define H2, so the entropy, and we got this definition of the dissipation, and with Poincaré inequality and with some bounds on the approximate solution, we recover exponential decay towards the steady state. Okay, so that is the proof given in the paper by Bodino, Lebovitz, Mouot, and Villani. And the idea by Filbé and Herda, so in the PhD thesis by Maxime Herda, was to use this, so use this result to build a scheme which preserves the steady state. And the idea was to use, so write first a numerical scheme for the steady state. So if you write first a numerical scheme for the steady state, then you have an approximation of the steady flux. And then you will write a scheme, so they wrote a scheme for the evolutive equation by using this formulation for the flux. So, and with this technique, so with this strategy, they studied a forward or backward Euler in time scheme with finite volume in space with this strategy, and they established the exponential decay towards the approximate steady state. Okay, it's already an interesting result, but I think that the main drawback of this strategy is that they need a pre-computation of the steady state. So either they know the steady state and they will use it in the definition, for the definition here of the flux, or they compute an approximate steady state and they use it in the definition of the scheme. So my idea is that it's not fully logical to pre-compute the steady state just to see the evolution of the solution. What you want is that when you have a scheme for the evolutive equation, you want that at the end, after a long, after many iterations, you get an approximation to the steady state. But if you pre-compute the steady state, it's, I think, not so interesting. So what we proved with Maxime is that some well-known scheme for this equation have the same properties. Okay, that's what I want to show you. And I will introduce these schemes. So now I start just from this equation without knowing anything on the steady state. So you have the definition here of the flux. And I still write, so as I have this kind of equation, so the scheme has always this form. And now I have to define the numerical fluxes. Okay, and here I have a diffusive part and a convective part. So in the first lecture, I gave you some approximation, some numerical fluxes for the diffusion term and also for the convective term. So I will use them. So how can I define the numerical flux? I have the diffusion term. So for the diffusion term, I already use this definition, minus tau sigma FL minus Fk. Okay, that's what I used for the approximation of the integral over sigmas of minus gradient of f. For the convective part, I defined, if you remember, I defined some UK sigma, which is an approximation, so maybe it's 1 over the measure of sigma of u dot the normal. I can, if it's possible to compute this quantity, I will define UK sigma like that, or I take an approximation. And then, for the convective part, I introduced two well-known schemes, the centered scheme and the upwind scheme. So with the centered scheme, I will just use, so UK sigma times Fk plus Fl divided by 2. This is with the centered scheme, and with the centered approximation, and maybe with the upwind approximation, I will write minus tau sigma Fl minus Fk plus, and here, depending on the sign of UK sigma, I will choose Fk or Fl. Okay. With what I introduced in the first lecture, I would write this kind of approximation. So you may choose one of them. But what I want to show you is that both of this scheme can be written under this form. Okay, you see they are linear with respect to Fl and Fk. And now you can write, so for the first, for this term, what is so you write tau sigma. So here maybe the measure of sigma you can replace by tau sigma times d sigma. So you can factorize by tau sigma, and what is the value of the prefactor of Fk? It's just plus 1 plus tau sigma d sigma divided by 2 times d sigma UK sigma divided by 2. And what is the prefactor of Fl? It's minus 1 plus d sigma UK sigma divided by 2. And you can, if you introduce this function, 1 minus s divided by 2, it can be written under this form with a b function. And it's exactly the same for the upwind scheme. Now the upwind b function is 1 plus negative part of s. So you see that with this compact formulation, b formulation, it's no more possible to distinguish the diffusive part from the convective part. But it's written somewhere, it's written here, because the two B functions satisfy this property, B at x minus B at minus x is equal to minus x. So it means if you use this property, you can recover the diffusive part on one side and the convective part on the other side. And, okay, so this is a generic form, a B flux, containing upwind and centered scheme. And what is crucial in order to study the convergence of this scheme is that the B function must satisfy these three properties. B at 0 must be equal to 1. It is for the consistency, so the 2, 1 for the consistency, and for the stability, the B function must be positive. Okay. Here you may say, okay, it's not true for the centered scheme. The positivity is not satisfied by the centered scheme. Okay, but it is well known that we may encounter some problem with the centered scheme. So here we will apply it. In practice, it's not that B must be positive. It's the evaluation of B on these quantities must be positive. So it will give you some assumption on the mesh, and you will see some Peclet number for those of you that know this quantity. So you have some hypothesis on the mesh. Okay, so I use now this formulation. And if you remember what I did in the last lecture, I introduced the notion of thermal equilibrium for the case where U is minus the gradient of a given potential, psi. And in this case, we use the fact that this quantity is a thermal equilibrium. It means that if F is a constant times E exponential of minus psi, the current vanishes, the flux vanishes. So the question is it possible to find a B function which will ensure this property? So preservation of the thermal equilibrium. So that I hope that in this case, so when I use, so the scheme will be exact for the equilibrium. And so as U is given as this form, minus the gradient of psi, I will choose for U k sigma. So here you have the definition of U k sigma. I will use a classical approximation of the gradient, so psi k minus psi L divided by d sigma. So I use this approximation for U k sigma. And now, if I want to preserve the exact equilibrium, it means that if the discrete f, so fk has this form, then I want that the numerical flux vanishes. And in practice, it's true if and only if the B function is a Bernoulli function defined by x divided by exponential of x minus 1. So it's easy to see that. Maybe I can write the proof. So it's true if I assume that we have this property of the B function, of course. Because, so if you write, you have the definition of the scheme, and I replace UK sigma, D sigma by the definition, so you have B of Cl minus Pk times Fk minus B of Pk minus Pl times Fl. And you want that if phi k is lambda exponential minus psi k and psi l is lambda exponential minus psi l, you want that it is equal to 0. Okay, so it means that B of Psi L minus Psi K exponential of minus, so I will factorize by this quantity, so minus Psi K minus Psi L, I hope, okay, so it is Psi L minus Psi K, minus B of Psi K minus Psi L must be 0 for all Psi K and Psi L, so it means that B at x exponential times x minus B of minus x is equal to 0. But with the property of the B function, minus B of minus x is minus x minus B at x. So you find that B at x must be x divided by exponential x minus 1. Okay? So I wrote it. So I insist on the fact that it is an if and only if condition. So if you want to preserve the thermal equilibrium, you have to use the Scharfetter-Gummel scheme. So the Bernoulli function. This, so it's called the Scharfetter-Gummel scheme because the scheme, so the idea was introduced in this paper in the late 60s, and it has been widely used for the simulation of semiconductor devices. Okay? So now I have a family of schemes called B schemes, including centered, Scharfetter-Gummel and upward scheme, and here you have, so you see the plot of the B function. So in red, it's the B function of upward scheme. In blue, the B function of the Scharfetter-Gummel scheme, and in green, the centered scheme. And I just want to mention the fact that the Scharfetter-Gummel scheme is a second order scheme, like the centered scheme, when you have some diffusion. If the diffusion degenerates, you recover the upwind scheme. Okay, so now I write my scheme for the Fokker-Planck equation using the B formulation of the numerical schemes. So here you have the definition of the fluxes for the interior edges, for the Dirichlet edges, and for the Neumann edges. And you see this, we still have an implicit scheme in time. Okay? So now, considering this scheme, I can consider the associate steady state. I will consider the associate steady state for getting this evolution term. But first, I would like to give an existence and uniqueness result for this scheme. So you see the scheme now, it is a linear scheme. So you can write it under a matricial form at each time step. And in practice, due to the property of the B function, the matrix has nice properties. And it is what we call an M matrix, so a monotone matrix. And it means that we have existence and uniqueness of a solution, and we may also have some bounds on the solution. Okay, I give you the hypothesis. So on the mesh, always the same. We start with positive initial condition. We assume some bounds on the boundary condition. And we also assume some bounds on the UK sigma. It means that the velocity field should be an L infinity field. Okay, so it's easy, it's quite easy to prove that the scheme has a unique non-negative solution. Now for the steady state. So for the steady state you just change a bit the slide, but you see just writing infinity here instead of n+1, it's almost the same scheme. And for this case, we can also prove existence and uniqueness of a solution to the scheme and some bounds. But maybe it's not so easy. So we have, because the velocity field is not divergence free. Okay, so we have to adapt some results. So in practice, to prove the lower bound and the upper bounds, we adapt some techniques developed by De Giorgi for this, the non-coercive equation. Okay, so it's possible to have bounds on the discrete steady state. What about the long-time behavior? So, the key idea at the continuous level is to rewrite the flux. So that's what we try to do at the discrete level. So here you have the definition of the flux with Fk and Fl. First thing to do is to write F is equal to F infinity times H. So I replace Fk by Hk times Fk infinity and Fl by Hl times Fl infinity. And now, from this line to this one or to the next one, I use the property of the B function. So you see, B of minus uk sigma d sigma, using the property B of x minus B of minus x is equal to minus x, can be just rewritten as a function of B of uk sigma d sigma. And in practice, you will see that it gives you a formulation with the flux at the steady state times Hk plus, so this function, B of uk sigma d sigma times Fl infinity times Hk minus Hl. So you see that it has the same form than this one. You have the numerical flux for the steady state times Hk, so times some H, and here you have an approximation of the gradient of H times F infinity and something depending on the B function. So here I have rewritten this term as a function of B of uk sigma d sigma, but I can do the same thing, so the reverse thing. So I rewrite this term as a function of B of minus uk sigma d sigma, and then I get the flux at the steady state times HL plus here another approximation of minus F infinity gradient of H. So depending on the age, I can use this formulation or this one. Both are equal to the initial to the definition of the Fk sigma. So what I do, it's depending on the sign of Fk sigma, I will use the first one or the second one. And then, so depending on the sign, it's written here. So if it's non-negative, I will use the first formula. And if it is non-positive, I will use the second one. So that I can write an upwind flux here, depending an upwind flux for the approximation of this quantity, plus an approximation of this one, with an approximation of F infinity at the H, which depends on B. Okay, so you see, really, I do what already did Maxime and Francis. Using this formula, they wrote an upwind scheme for this part and a classical scheme for the other part. And what we see is that it is written somewhere for the B scheme. Okay, so as we have this reformulation of the fluxes, then I will not write all the computations, but we can adapt the proof given by Francis Filbé and Maxime Herda. So we define a discrete relative phi entropy. So phi here is just a convex function which vanishes at 1 and the derivative also vanishes at 1. And so we have this discrete relative entropy, and we may find that with this definition of the dissipation, which is a kind of approximation of the integral of f infinity times the gradient of h times the gradient of phi prime of h, we have the discrete entropy dissipation property. The proof is almost the same than the proof I made for the porous media equation. I will first use the convexity of phi to write the difference between h phi n plus 1 minus h phi n, and I will use the scheme and use this definition of the fluxes so that we get, so this term is what is given by the diffusive term in the new formulation. Okay, so with the discrete entropy dissipation property, first we can prove some uniform bonds on the approximate solution. So it's quite interesting because as U is not a divergence-free velocity field, it's not easy to prove this result directly, but with the entropy, just choosing the phi function, we have to adapt them because you see these phi functions are not regular functions, they are not C2 functions, but with some regularization, we can use this phi plus and phi minus function, and here, and they are chosen such that the initial value of the entropy is 0, and then due to the evolution, we prove that at each time step it is 0, and it gives some uniform bonds of the solution, for the solution. So the first point. And then choosing the phi2 function as at the continuous level, we recover some exponential decay using a discrete Poincaré inequality. We get this exponential decay for the entropy, and we have also some decay for the L1 norm. Okay? I show you some numerical experiment. So we take a basic test case with a given velocity field, which in this case it derives from a potential. But we have an example for which we have an exact solution, and we exactly know the steady state, and we know also the decay rate to the steady state. And then, if here you have for the three B functions, so centered, upwind, and Schaffeder-Gummel scheme, we show the decay towards the steady state of here the L1 norm and here of the entropy, and you see we compare to the exact decay rate, and so for a given mesh, which is not a very fine mesh, we already have a good decay with respect to the steady state. Okay, so for this figure, we really use what I have shown. So we have the scheme for the evolutive equation, the scheme for the steady state, and we compare the evolutive solution and the steady state. What is the difference here is that we compare to the real steady state. In this case, we know what is the steady state. So we can define the discretization over the mesh, and now instead of comparing to the steady state associated to the scheme, we compare to the exact steady state. And what do we see? We see that the Scharfetter-Gummel scheme is exact for the steady state. So we have the same curve, but for the centered and the upwind scheme, they are not exact. So here we have some saturation, and in practice, the value of the saturation depends on the mesh, because when the size of the mesh tends to 0, you will see that the curve will be more deep here. Okay, so you see that if you compare to the real steady state, you may think that Scharfetter-Gummel is a better scheme because it preserves the steady state. But for each scheme, if you compare the scheme to its steady state, you still have exponential decay. Okay, I think that I am finished, so I will let you. I had some slides about nonlinear schemes. I will not show them. I will just go to the conclusion. Maybe a conclusion, because it is the end of my lectures. So I hope I have showed you that finite volume schemes are well adapted for the discretization of conservation laws, and they can also be adapted to system of conservation laws. It's not a problem. I have chosen very basic examples like porous media or drift diffusion equation, but you can adapt them to other kind of equation. I know that some of you know that they practice. Okay, I hope that I have shown that they are able to preserve physical properties like positivity, conservation of mass, entropy dissipation, and also long-time behavior. In practice, if you are interested in asymptotic behavior with respect to some physical parameters, it's also possible to get some results. For dissipative problems, they may satisfy discrete entropy dissipation properties. I have not insisted on this part, so with the discrete entropy dissipation properties, we recover some bonds on the solution, not only L-infinity bonds, but bonds which can lead to a compactness property. It was not really my topic here. I focused more on the knowledge of the long-time behavior. And, okay, somewhere I showed you that classical results like compactness properties or functional inequalities may be adapted to the discrete setting of a finite volume method, but it's possible to do that. Okay, I thank you for your attention, and if you have questions.